Well, welcome to the Point Loma Church podcast. My name is R.O. Smith, and we are back with a new series to complement our Sunday sermon teaching, Earthwise, God's Call to Care for Creation. Now, we are inviting professionals from our community to share from their experience and explore how environmental stewardship is an act of justice, discipleship, and hope in Christ. And so, similar to our Hard Feelings podcast, when we had professionals come in from the psychological field, now we're having people come in from the environmental field. And today, we have Ryan Waterman. Welcome, Ryan. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you so much, R.O., for the invitation. It's nice to be here.
Now, you tell people really quick, what do you do for work, and what does it have to do with the environment?
So I'm an environmental lawyer.
Okay.
My practice breaks into kind of maybe three different tranches. One, I work on major project approvals, and in California, that means complying with environmental law along the way.
Okay.
Second, I focus on water quality, my clients' water quality problems, whether that means helping them with federal or state permits or working their way out of a mishap or some sort of a lack of compliance.
Okay.
And then as an outgrowth of my water quality practice, I also work on contaminated sites. So if there's been legacy contamination that's been discovered, sometimes
specifically water in the water, or can it be anything?
Soil, water, groundwater, and legacy contamination that's been discovered, or something, an upset that happens, then I work with regulatory agencies and my clients to investigate and devise a cleanup.
Okay, so I'm going to turn off my thing. I want to know more about your clients in just a second. But so tell us really quick, how did you get involved in environmental law? Like, obviously you went to law school, but what made you choose environmental law? Tell us your story on that.
Thanks. I didn't know any lawyers growing up, and I never even considered becoming a lawyer. In college, I had to declare a major right off the bat, and so I declared business administration because it seemed general enough. And at some point, everybody had to take a business law class, and the knock on the class was that it was awful and boring and terrible. And I found myself fascinated. I was in a big lecture hall of 100 people, and I was the only one sitting on the edge of my seat. Couldn't wait for the next class. Everybody else was vomiting in the rows.
They're like asleep, and you're like, "This is great."
I was like, "This is amazing." And I think one of the things that really drew me to it is because a lot of the cases that we were reading about didn't turn out the way I thought. My internal sense of who should prevail didn't always line up with how the cases were going. And that was really intriguing to me. Why am I getting this? Why was I approaching it from one way and the law was coming in a different way? And so I did a summer internship with a lawyer in town for where I grew up after I took this class. And he was a patent and business lawyer, not something that I was focused on. But I enjoyed I enjoyed the practice. I enjoyed how, some days he was in court, some days he was meeting with clients, some days he was working with professionals. And I thought this kind of working environment and this kind of challenge was intriguing, but I still didn't have a why. Why would I go to law school? Right. It was an interest, but I didn't know why. And so after college, I worked for 3 years for a nonprofit housing company in the Central Valley. If you went north, south, east, west, and put your finger in the middle of California, that's about where Visalia is.
Yes, I know Visalia, yes.
Yeah, so that's where I was for 3 years. My first year, I was an intern working for the CEO. And then he hired me as an administrative analyst to kind of work on special projects for him. And while I was there, I got really interested in land use and water conflicts, especially in the Valley. Those things are very top of mind and prevalent. And so that was my why. I said, okay, now I know, these are conversations that I'd like to be involved in. And the law is one route. Lawyers are always involved in those types of conversations. So then I had my why. And then I applied to law school. And it was funny, one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever been given about practicing law came to me when I told the CEO that I was applying to law school and asked him to be a recommender. And he said, "Oh my gosh, why would you want to be a lawyer? All they do is tell you what you can't do." And that was such a valuable piece of advice because, in the law, our job as counselors are not just to say, you can't do that, but to help our clients find a way to get their business goals, their their aspirations realized within the context of the law,
Okay.
and what's currently in front of them.
I was going to say, do you find that you tell people what they can't do, or are you?
So I
or do
always
you
try. I always try, and if I have to say that's not allowed, I always try and follow that up with, but
give them
there are other pathways to accomplish your goals.
Right.
Sometimes it's not possible, but
Right.
a lot of the times, there's some creativity that can be brought to bear, looking at questions differently. Yeah.
So you were talking about your clients. Like, who are your clients? Is it like everyday Joes like me, or is it companies? Is it the government? Like, who is your client?
Most of my clients are private companies.
Okay.
Some of my clients are government entities. I have clients that are, I would say, normal people. But generally speaking, I work with on private side matters, not on government matters. The firm that I work with, Brownstein Hyatt Farber is extremely well known in the water.
Say that five times fast.
Right? Yeah. They're very well known in water.
Okay.
And water is inherently a public issue. So a lot of my public clients are water clients that are public entities that have water issues, whether water quality.
Okay. So a real quick example would be like someone starting a business and their water is not flowing right or clean, or what would be a quick example? Sorry.
So there are a whole bunch of state and federal laws requiring us to do good things managing water, whether it's groundwater or stormwater. A lot of times folks mess up compliance with those permits because they're very complicated and they're technical and require expertise.
Got it.
And it's very much a professionalized field. So sometimes my clients are not fully aware of the requirements that are placed on them. And so then they need a little help getting into compliance.
Got it. So what is, when you talk about like cases, do you go to court? Or is it mostly meeting room litigation? What is it?
Yeah.
Or both?
I love that my practice is varied in that way. So some days I am in court. I do litigation. A lot of times I'm working with experts because people who know a lot about whatever subject it is that I need to learn about. For example, one project that I was proud of here in the San Diego County, I permitted 300 or 400 megawatts of renewable energy in San Diego County, including a wind farm and several solar projects. And in the wind farm, one of the key issues became golden eagles. So I learned a ton
the actual
about golden eagles. Yeah, because they're incredible species, but sometimes they miscalculate how fast the blades are spinning. And so if you've eagles around wind turbines, they can get knocked by the turbines. So it's very important to understand where they are and what they're doing, because you don't want to accidentally start killing golden eagles with your wind turbines. But yeah, that was every project, like every large complicated project, always has some environmental issue that becomes the issue du jour, and that we really have to focus on and make sure we get right. And that is a really fascinating part of my job, in that I get to work with experts, who know tons about eagles, and I have to learn from them so that I can translate that in court documents or in public documents that may end up in court, so that I can make it comprehensible.
So we're here with environmental lawyer Ryan Waterman and golden eagle professional or expert.
No, absolutely not.
That's amazing.
But each case, there's always something.
That is interesting, because when you go through Palm Springs and you see all those wind turbines, I never think about the birds. I figure they just kind of know and they just go around, but
not necessarily. Sometimes they get taken.
Gosh, that's interesting. So you talked a little bit, you touched a little bit about what your proudest moment, but what I imagine you've had thousands of cases or hundreds of, I don't even know, but of all the cases, is there like ever a recurring issue that you're just kind of like, again, like what is, like, can't these people figure it out? Is there like ever, you know what I'm saying? Like, is there ever that issue that you're just like, oh, here we go again?
Yeah. So the history of environmental law is that a lot of environmental law has been signed into law by Republican administrations.
Okay.
But the enforcement of environmental law typically is more vigorously done by Democratic administrations. So, for example, the National Environmental Policy Act, which is kind of a open government law that requires the federal government to analyze environmental impacts before they approve major projects. That law, the Clean Air Act, the rewriting of the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Water Act were all passed during the Nixon administration. Ronald Reagan, when he was governor of California,
right.
he signed the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA, which is our flagship environmental law. Governor Schwarzenegger, in 2005, he issued the executive order S305, which for the very first time established greenhouse gas reduction targets and made it the policy of the government to reduce greenhouse gases by specific amounts at specific times. But the history of all these laws coming into existence and then being enforced tends to be more democratic administrations that enforce those laws more vigorously.
Why is that? Is that just, because you would think if they're enforcing it vigorously, there's vigorous language. I don't know if that's the right word, but that the Republican, bend puts into it. And so why don't they defend it? Do you think, or is that just
the executive can decide how they're going to allocate resources?
Okay.
So for example, you see just to take the current Trump administration as an example, today we're seeing reduction in funding for the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA. We're seeing reductions in funding for other resource-based agencies. And when there's less people, less money, less enforcement happens.
Got it.
And that is a recurring trend. It also is, if we focus on another major environmental law, the Clean Water Act.
Right.
One of the things that was embedded in the Clean Water Act to start was this concept of waters of the United States, which are waters that are subject to the law. But the law never defines exactly what the waters of the United States are. So in the last 10 years, there have been each administration, Obama, Trump 1, Biden, now Trump 2, has issued new regulations interpreting what waters of the United States means. And then there have been some intervening Supreme Court decisions that have also influenced that. But every single administration has had a different rulemaking. So
does that include oceans too, or is it all like
oceans are absolutely not unequivocally a water of the United States. Okay. It gets a little dicey though when you go from like a river to a stream to a wash to a wetland to a vernal pool to as you get less consistent water flowing, it gets a little bit harder for people to say, well, is that a water? Is that a navigable water? Is that, because that's the term that's used. That's a term that's used.
The standing water in my lawn, is that
a navigable water? Yeah. So each administration has kind of gone back and forth, trying to be more expansive or less expansive. So you see these recurring issues, and in our practice, we write little essays that we publish to our clients in the general legal field to help explain things that are happening and to give our clients and others an understanding of, hey, there's things that are changing. And, in the last 10 years, I've written that this new rule came out. Oh, wait, now it goes back this way. And now it's going that way.
And is it as a lawyer, is it your job to, obviously you're interpreting it and trying to, I guess, get rulings, but if a new law comes down, you can be like, wait, we've been operating on this for the last 8 years, and so we can't just change it because there's so many, or is that your job, or is that the judge's job, or I guess?
Well, so when
this is
Congress...
so fascinating, by the way.
I'm glad you feel that way.
I'm like you right now at your college class, like, ooh, taking notes.
I'm glad you feel that way. Sometimes when I talk to my wife, I've got about a 10-second limit.
You can tell when the eyes
are going to
drooping. I'm here, man.
She's like, you get 10 seconds of my attention on these legal things. That's one of the reasons I think they call lawyering practice, because you never truly finish the learning process. Each year, Congress and the California legislature, the two legislative bodies that I focus on the most, are issuing new laws, not just a few, a lot, and regulations are coming out that affect different areas of practice, and so you have to keep up on it. And part of the process that I enjoy being a lawyer too is this constant. You have to kind of constantly have this learning attitude, And when you think you know it all, that's a dangerous moment, because that's usually when you find out that there's something you don't know.
That's a good one on life. That's a good thought on life too. When do you think? So, like in the years you've done it, how have you seen it change the most? Has it? I mean, it sounds like it changes with each administration.
It can.
Is there one thing that you've really seen in your 20? How long?
About 20 years.
20 years that you've
practice.
Seen that's changed the most.
Yeah. So I entered private practice in 2005. And so in the last 20 years, the thing that I think has changed the most is the awareness of climate change and action to take it on. When I was graduating, when I was in law school and graduating from law school, it was understood among environmental lawyers and students that climate change was an issue. And it had been at various times an issue of concern federal government level too. But at that time, if I talked to you sitting on an airplane and we just met, most people were not that concerned about climate change in 1999 or 2000. Right. In fact, probably the biggest difference between Gore and Bush, George W. Bush, was their difference in opinion on climate change. But was that an issue in that presidential election? Absolutely not. Nobody mentioned it. But now climate change is top of mind, and the state of California is taking aggressive action. The federal government has taken some action, although a lot of with the Trump administration, you start seeing things backing away from that. But yeah, definitely the awareness of climate change and taking action towards trying to address it. Biggest change.
So what do you think? One more law, and then we're going to get more personal. But what do you think has been the most impactful law ever? I mean, there's been what do you feel like is the most impactful law case that we would know, or that we maybe
so building on that idea of climate change, in 2008 the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision called Massachusetts versus the Environmental Protection Agency, Massachusetts versus EPA, and a consortium of states sued EPA because EPA had refused to make an endangerment finding under the Clean Air Act, and it refused to extend its Clean Air Act authority over greenhouse gases as pollutants. And the Supreme Court in that case said greenhouse gases are pollutants, and EPA under the Clean Air Act has the authority to regulate them. So then in 2009, EPA comes out with an endangerment finding saying that for the first time, 6 different greenhouse gases were an endangerment to public health and welfare, and then moving towards regulating under the part of the Clean Air Act that this finding was made. It was under the vehicle emissions code, right? Because remember, Clean Air Act was originally, and one of the big reasons why we have the Clean Air Act is because of smog and vehicle emissions. So there's a whole section of it that deals just with vehicle emissions, and that's where this case started. And so for the very first time, we have regulation that's like, hey, we have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions associated with vehicle emissions, but that was then more broadly interpreted. So, going back to the theme of, administrations sometimes change their interpretations. The Trump administration now has proposed a rescission of that in 2009 endangerment finding to say that it's no longer the case that there's a greenhouse gases or endangering public health and welfare. So that would be a big change if that actually takes place. Yeah.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Okay. Yeah. Well, Ryan, let's move into you personally. Obviously, you chose environmental law. What role does God play in that? I mean, you're obviously a professing Christian. You know, what role does God play in your practice? Does he play a role, or is it just like, no, I kind of have to follow, this is my law book, or,
Yeah, absolutely plays a role. The legal profession has got a lot of potential pitfalls for practitioners. It's very easy to be prideful. It's very easy to get kind of caught up on your own sense of authority or sense of status. What other lawyers do in representing their clients can make you angry. It can be very stressful. There can be a lot of pressure. It can be long hours. And I think my faith in God, my faith generally, is a very important part of my practice because it helps to try and keep me level. And I think it also helps me to try and have, treat people as people and have compassion for people, act as I try not to separate, I'm a Christian here and not in my job. I try and be a Christian in all phases of my job. There's sometimes when I have to be, tough and, represent my client's interest in a way that's, that makes me, have to be a tough advocate.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I try not to lose try not to separate my faith from my job. I try and interpret them as being together.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you talk about, I was thinking like, you're dealing with morality a lot, right? The law, but you're kind of coming at it from a more like, these are also humans. Like, it's really easy to kind of be like, nope, just what's on the paper, what's law judge done, and it kind of can be cold, but there's also like, how do you have care and compassion for this person, even this lawyer that's sitting across from you that's like arguing totally against you, and you're just like, are you a knucklehead? Where are you picking this up at? Yeah,
I think absolutely the case. I mean, I try and have compassion for my clients. I take the part about being a counselor very seriously. We were just in the service, and Pastor Carla was preaching about various names for Jesus, and one of the names is Wonderful Counselor. And I don't think of myself as a wonderful counselor, but I definitely think of myself as a counselor,
right? And
not in like a mental health kind of stand, but more as how can I use my learning, my perspective to give wise advice and to help my client not only achieve their business goals, but also to achieve their life goals. And sometimes it's extremely stressful. I remember being a junior associate at a prior firm, and we were having a big meeting before a hearing, and the clients were in the room, and we had another law firm that was representing a client that was on the same side of this litigation as us, and we kind of were talking about a potential Achilles heel in our case. And at one point, one of the clients just got up and just left the room, just didn't say anything, just walked out. And my boss, the partner that was on the case, kind of gave me an eye like, hey, go check on him, make sure he's okay. And so I went outside, and he was just sitting on a bench along the wall in this building. And I sat next to him and I said, are you okay? And he said, I just spent 10 years of my life on this project, and you guys are just talking about how this could all fall apart. And I just watching 10 years of my life, like dangling by a thread, right. And I felt a lot of compassion for him. And on the other side, sometimes the folks that are on the other side of matters, they believe just as strongly that right. in the correctness of their perspective, and I have to respect that too. Right. Especially if it's public folks that are representing, and they're doing things that are essentially volunteer time, volunteer hours, and raising money to bring public interest litigation. I mean, those folks deserve a lot of respect as well.
Yeah, I mean that's everything our system is built on is like, let's debate it, let's talk about it, and then there's a judge that's going to determine it. And like both sides are adamant that their side is right or whatever, whatever the word is. And so, yeah, that can be tough. And I would think like, even with dealing with clients, I don't know if you've ever had like your heart like break for someone, but you just kind of have to stay the course on what you're doing, and it's like, oh my gosh, I couldn't be a lawyer. I could not do it. My heart would just break. Anyway, so where do you see, like, for someone like us, a plain person like me, where do you see like environmental law and like scriptures intersecting?
Yeah. So I guess in a couple of different ways. So you had asked about like, how did my faith play into my job.
Right.
And one of my wife's favorite passages, my wife Julie Roller's favorite passages, is Micah 6:8. And I'm just going to paraphrase it. What does your Lord require of you but to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with your God, right? And so I really find that it's very succinct lot in there that is so applicable to whatever profession you're in, right? But certainly in the law, right? If I can walk humbly, if I can do justice, if I can love kindness in my daily practice, then I feel like I'm doing a good job. Another very strong influence in the way I practice law, it comes from my dad and my mom. Growing up, we every summer they led a work week mission trip for our church youth, senior high youth, and they would pick a church and a community that needed help, and then we'd go as a week-long mission trip, and then they would do basically housing rehab on homes in the community. And as the son of the director and the chief cook, it was just vacation for me. I got to hang out with the high school kids. I have pictures of me in third grade wearing, carpentry bags and suspenders, because the carpentry bags were heavy enough they would have just pulled my pants right off if I hadn't been wearing the suspenders. That was a through line through my entire growing up, and so that idea of service, not just giving money, but also tangible service, your skills, your time, definitely came through. And in one of the scriptures that stands out for my parents and their service is the Matthew 25. My dad's funeral, one of his best friends, who was a Presbyterian minister, called him a Matthew 25 man. And there's a part there starting at verse 35 where Jesus is speaking to the nations about when he was served, and he said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked, you gave me clothing. I was sick, you took care of me. I was in prison, you visited me. And then the righteous say, when did we do this, Lord? And he said, whenever you did it for
the least of these
brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me. And so I try and remember that in my profession. We have an opportunity to participate in pro bono cases, and for folks that are not able to pay for their own legal services. And so that's been a very important part of my practice. And some of the cases I'm most proud about are pro bono cases where I was able to intercede for somebody and to do justice for a family or for an individual who wasn't in a position to pay for that service, for legal services, but certainly deserved it. So that's absolutely something that another place I see the scriptures intersect. And I guess last, there's a lot of places throughout the Bible you can say, like, where God is saying, hey, I'm giving you this earth, take care of it.
Right.
There's a through line. So that definitely is a underlying theme of environmental law. How do we live in this complex society that we have and we've developed, but also still keep the environment from becoming intolerable?
Right. So that it can, that it can provide for us, right? I'm always like amazed when I think of how many people live on this planet. I'll stop and I'm like, how are there enough oranges for people to, you know what I'm saying? Like even something that simple. But then sometimes if you've ever like gardened, sorry, this is a total side. If you've ever like gardened, you'll like pick and you're like, there are a lot of oranges here for like one part. And then you're like, oh my God, it's kind of like a awakening there where you're like, there it is. So, any words like for kind of closing, like what's something that our audience, what's something that from your perspective that we can do, I guess? Like
just
obviously we're not practicing environmental law, but like what would you say is a practical application for us?
Well, I would be the first one to admit that I'm not the best environmentalist. If I was a great environmentalist, I'd be vegan. I wouldn't eat meat.
Right.
I would do a lot of different things. But I think all of us can pay attention to our carbon footprint. Climate change is a real thing, and we happen to live in a state that's taking the lead, not just in the nation but in the world. We're learning how to fly this lower carbon plane of our society while we're building it.
While
right?
we're building it.
literally building it while we're doing it.
There's a commercial, right? Then there was a commercial where you see that, where people are building a plane while it's flying.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean, we're essentially transitioning our economy, which is, depending on the time of year and what's going on, either the fourth or fifth largest economy in the world.
Right. Just
I mean,
California. Right.
It's just California. We rival Japan and Germany and all that, So, paying attention to your individual carbon footprint is something that you can do. I think also it's important for all of us, to recognize that climate change is real. There's definitely a movement to say that it's not real, and I think the scientific evidence is so unbelievably overwhelming at this point, and the time we have left to really affect meaningful change is short enough that we all need to take a stand, and that may be a little bit uncomfortable if you're at Christmas dinner and somebody says, "Oh, I don't believe in climate change." You say like, "Well, why not?"
Yeah.
That can be something that all of us can do at an individual level.
And if anything, it may be engaging in a conversation of like, tell me more about that instead of attacking. Tell me more about why you think that is, and there's evidence that says the contrary. What do you think? Anyway.
Yeah,
sorry.
Absolutely. No. Yeah. And going back to the last series, right? About
Yeah. The psychology.
Emotions.
Yeah. Well, Ryan, thank you. I really appreciated how the environment and the Scripture intersect. I love that. Love mercy, do justly, and walk humbly with your God. Like we can all do that. Like that's what we all need to do. And then that becoming a Matthew 25 man or woman, like that would be that's so good. That is so good. So well, thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. If you were bored, I don't know what's wrong with you, because this is actually like cool. I was just like, what? There's so much, and I'm anyway. So thank you for joining us for the Point Level Podcast. We hope to see you next time, and we appreciate it, and take care.